The security guard's hand was already on the trigger when he pressed the taser against her back. 50,000 volts of electricity coursed through her body, enough to drop any person instantly to the ground in convulsing agony. But Jenna Reyes didn't even flinch. She turned around slowly, looked him directly in the eyes, and said in the calmest voice anyone had ever heard, "Is that all you've got?" That's when they realized the quiet night janitor at Pinnacle Tech Industries wasn't who she appeared to be. Navy SEALs don't just resist pain. They've been conditioned to find strength in it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me tell you how a woman who mopped floors and emptied trash cans became the most underestimated person in a building full of engineers and security experts. Meet Jenna Marie Reyes, 29 years old. Auburn hair always pulled back in a simple ponytail, average height with a lean but unremarkable build. She had been working the night shift as a janitor at Pinnacle Tech Industries for 8 months, arriving every evening at 10 p.m. sharp and leaving before dawn. The sprawling technology complex housed over 300 employees during the day, but at night it became Jenna's quiet domain of empty corridors, humming servers, and fluorescent lights casting long shadows across polished floors. Pinnacle Tech was located in the heart of Silverbrook Business District, a gleaming collection of glass towers where ambitious professionals climbed corporate ladders and million-dollar contracts were signed over expensive lunches. The company specialized in advanced cybersecurity solutions for government and military contracts, which meant the building was filled with former military personnel, high-level security clearance holders, and people who took themselves very seriously. To them, the night cleaning crew was invisible, necessary but forgettable. Like the furniture or the coffee machines. Jenna moved through the building like a ghost, pushing her cart from office to office, conference room to conference room. She wore the standard-issue gray uniform with Pinnacle Cleaning Services embroidered on the chest, comfortable sneakers that made no sound on the marble floors, and a quiet demeanor that suggested she preferred to blend into the background. Her work was methodical and thorough. She dusted every surface, emptied every wastebasket, and left each space spotless for the next day's important meetings and crucial deadlines. The day shift employees barely acknowledged her existence. When they occasionally worked late and encountered her in the hallways, they might offer a polite nod or a quick evening before hurrying past. To them, she was just another service worker doing a job that required no special skills or intelligence. Someone who had probably never been to college, never served in the military, never accomplished anything remarkable. They saw a woman who cleaned up after other people for minimum wage, and that's all they needed to see. The night security team treated her with the same casual indifference. 3 guards rotated shifts to monitor the building. Rodriguez, a former police officer who spent most of his time watching sports highlights on his phone. Thompson, an ex-military man who took his job seriously but viewed the cleaning crew as a minor security inconvenience. And Patterson, a younger guard who was working his way through community college and barely looked up from his textbooks when Jenna passed by the security desk. "Evening, ma'am," Thompson would say when she badged in each night, his tone professionally polite but distant. He would check her ID against his list, watch her collect her cleaning supplies from the storage closet, and then return to his security monitors without another thought. In his mind, she was cleared, predictable, and harmless, just another person doing a simple job that required no special attention. What none of them noticed was how Jenna moved through the building. Her steps were too measured, her awareness too sharp for someone simply focused on cleaning tasks. When she entered a room, her eyes automatically scanned the corners first, identified all exits, and noted anything out of place before she ever touched her cleaning supplies. She had an unconscious habit of positioning herself with her back to walls, and she always seemed to know exactly where everyone else in the building was located, even when they were floors away. They didn't notice that she never seemed tired, despite working 8-hour shifts that would exhaust most people. They didn't see how she could lift heavy equipment that typically required 2 people, or how she moved with the kind of fluid economy that comes from years of physical conditioning. When she cleaned the executive conference rooms with their floor-to-ceiling windows, she never stood directly in front of the glass, always at an angle, always with a clear path to cover. Her uniform was always spotless and properly fitted. Her posture was straighter than typical for someone who spent hours bent over cleaning tasks, and she had a way of staying completely calm in any situation. When the building's fire alarm malfunctioned one night, sending ear-piercing sirens throughout the complex, everyone else was startled and confused. Jenna simply continued her work, unfazed by the chaos, as if loud alarms and emergency situations were nothing new to her. But perhaps the most telling detail was something no one ever saw: the small, faded tattoo on her left shoulder that read, "The only easy day was yesterday," the unofficial motto of the Navy SEALs. It was hidden beneath her uniform, just like everything else about her real identity. Have you ever been completely invisible to people who should have known better? Have you ever had your true abilities dismissed because of someone's assumptions about your job or appearance? Drop a comment below. Sometimes the most dangerous people are hiding in plain sight. Tonight, all of those assumptions were about to be shattered in the most dramatic way possible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The culture at Pinnacle Tech Industries was built on hierarchy, credentials, and respect earned through titles rather than character. During the day, the building buzzed with conversations about advanced degrees, security clearances, and military service records. Employees wore their achievements like badges of honor, MBA from prestigious universities, years spent in elite military units, certifications in cutting-edge technologies. In this environment, someone who pushed a mop and emptied trash cans wasn't just overlooked. She was practically invisible. The executive team treated Jenna like a piece of moving furniture. During her rounds, she would enter conference rooms where late-night strategy sessions were taking place. The executives, Director Harrison, VP Mitchell, and Project Manager Williams, would continue their conversations about classified contracts and million-dollar deals as if she wasn't even there. They discussed sensitive information, shared confidential details about government clients, and debated security protocols while she quietly cleaned around them. The Defense Department contract requires enhanced penetration testing, Director Harrison would say, not bothering to lower his voice as Jenna dusted the conference table 3 feet away. "We need someone with real field experience, not some academic who learned cybersecurity from textbooks." VP Mitchell would nod in agreement, completely oblivious to the woman methodically cleaning their workspace. "Exactly. We need operators who understand how systems actually fail in the real world. People who've been in situations where lives depend on technology working perfectly." Jenna would continue her work silently, emptying wastebaskets and wiping down surfaces while they planned operations that required the exact kind of field experience she possessed but could never reveal. To them, she was just part of the building's maintenance, as worthy of attention as the air conditioning system or the fluorescent lights overhead. The day shift technical staff was equally dismissive, but in a more casual way. When they worked late and encountered her in the hallways, they would step aside with barely concealed impatience, as if her presence was an inconvenience that interrupted their important work. Software engineer Davis would mutter, "Excuse me," without making eye contact when she needed to clean around his workstation. Network specialist Parker would continue typing furiously on his keyboard, acting annoyed that someone was disturbing him by doing her job. "Can you come back later?" Parker asked one evening, not looking up from his multiple monitors. "I'm trying to debug a critical security vulnerability here. This is pretty important stuff." Jenna simply nodded and moved on to the next office. She didn't mention that she could see his screen from where she stood, or that the critical vulnerability he was struggling with was a basic authentication bypass that could be fixed with about 10 lines of code. She had identified the problem and its solution within 30 seconds, but her opinion wasn't requested and wouldn't be welcomed. The attitude was even more pronounced among the former military personnel who worked there. Staff Sergeant Martinez, who handled physical security protocols, would barely acknowledge her presence when she cleaned the security office. He spent most evenings reviewing building access logs and updating threat assessments, tasks he considered far too complex and important for a civilian cleaning lady to understand. "These protocols aren't just guidelines," he explained to the younger guards one evening while Jenna cleaned nearby. "They're life and death procedures developed by people who've actually been in combat. You can't just learn this stuff from reading manuals or watching videos. It takes real experience in high-stress situations where people are trying to kill you." Former Navy communications specialist Roberts nodded knowingly. "Exactly. There's a huge difference between someone who studied military tactics in a classroom and someone who's actually used them when everything's going wrong and your life depends on making the right decision in seconds." Jenna continued dusting the filing cabinets, her expression neutral as they discussed the vast gulf between theoretical knowledge and practical experience. Neither man considered that the quiet woman cleaning their office might understand combat stress, tactical decision-making, and life or death situations better than both of them combined. The night security guards developed their own dismissive routine with her. Rodriguez would glance up from his phone when she approached the security desk, offering a distracted "hey there" before returning to his game highlights. Thompson maintained professional courtesy, but treated her like any other low-level service worker, someone who needed to be monitored and managed rather than respected. "Make sure you badge out properly when you leave," Thompson would remind her each morning, as if she might forget a basic requirement after months of following the same routine perfectly. "And remember, no personal items left in the building. Company policy." Patterson, the youngest guard, barely acknowledged her existence at all. He was too focused on his community college coursework, studying for exams that he believed would eventually lift him above the level of people like her, service workers without education or ambition, trapped in dead-end jobs that required no special skills or intelligence. The building's daytime cleaning supervisor, Mrs. Chun, reinforced these attitudes during her monthly check-ins. She would inspect Jenna's work areas while offering commentary about the importance of maintaining professional boundaries with the important people who worked in the building. "Remember, we're here to do a job, nothing more," Mrs. Chun would say. "These are highly educated professionals working on sensitive projects. They don't have time for small talk or distractions. Keep your head down, do your work efficiently, and don't try to engage them in conversation about things you wouldn't understand anyway." Even the other night shift workers maintained the hierarchy. The security maintenance technicians, who serviced cameras and access control systems, considered themselves a step above the cleaning crew. They had technical knowledge, security clearances, and responsibilities that seemed more important than emptying wastebaskets and mopping floors. "It must be nice to have such a simple job," one technician commented to his partner while Jenna cleaned nearby. "No stress, no real responsibility. Just show up, clean some stuff, and go home. Some people have all the luck." But perhaps the most telling indicator of their collective dismissal was how they talked about military service and combat experience in her presence, never suspecting that she might have insights into their discussions. They shared war stories, debated tactical decisions, and analyzed military operations as if she was completely incapable of understanding such complex topics. What none of them realized was that Jenna heard everything, understood everything, and could have corrected their misconceptions or shared experiences that would have left them speechless. But she remained silent, invisible, underestimated, exactly as she needed to be, tonight. That invisibility would become their biggest mistake. The first real glimpse of who Jenna truly was came on a Tuesday night in late October. During what should have been a routine evening at Pinnacle Tech, the building's advanced HVAC system had been acting up all week, causing temperature fluctuations that made the executive floors uncomfortably warm during the day. Building maintenance had scheduled an emergency repair for that evening, bringing in specialized technicians to work on the climate control systems located in the restricted mechanical areas of the building. Jenna was finishing her rounds on the 5th floor when the lights suddenly cut out completely. Not just dimmed or flickered, the entire floor plunged into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting should have activated within seconds, but nothing happened. The backup power systems that were supposed to maintain critical building functions had failed, leaving the floor in pitch blackness that was so complete it felt suffocating. Most people would have been disoriented, fumbling for their phone's flashlight or calling out for help. But Jenna didn't miss a step. She continued moving through the office complex with the same steady, purposeful pace she had maintained before the lights went out, navigating around desks, chairs, and equipment as if she could see perfectly. Her movements were so fluid and confident that if anyone had been watching with night vision equipment, they would have sworn she was walking through a well-lit room. She made her way to the electrical panel, located near the central elevator bank, a restricted access area that cleaning staff technically weren't supposed to enter without supervision. The panel was locked behind a metal door that required a special maintenance key. But Jenna had it open in under 30 seconds, using nothing but a paperclip from a nearby desk, and techniques that definitely weren't taught in any civilian locksmith course. Inside the electrical panel, she quickly identified the problem. 3 main circuit breakers had tripped simultaneously, which shouldn't have been possible unless there was a serious electrical fault or someone had deliberately caused the failure. But rather than simply resetting the breakers, she first checked for signs of sabotage or system compromise. Her hands moved over the wiring with the kind of systematic precision that comes from extensive training in identifying and disabling explosive devices or electronic surveillance equipment. What she found was concerning. The circuit failure wasn't accidental. Someone had installed a small device that was designed to overload the electrical system at a predetermined time. It was crude but effective, the kind of thing that could be assembled by someone with basic electrical knowledge and a desire to cause disruption. More importantly, it suggested that someone was testing the building's security responses and emergency procedures, rather than simply removing the device and restoring power. Jenna photographed it with her phone, carefully documenting its construction and placement. Then she disabled it using a technique that preserved evidence, while making it appear that the device had simply malfunctioned naturally. She reset the circuit breakers, and the lights came back on throughout the floor. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. But during those 10 minutes, Jenna had demonstrated skills that would have impressed military bomb disposal experts. She had moved through complete darkness with perfect navigation, picked a lock with professional efficiency, identified and disabled a sabotage device, and collected evidence while covering her tracks, all while maintaining the appearance of being nothing more than a cleaning lady who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. When security guard Thompson arrived to investigate the power outage, he found Jenna calmly continuing her cleaning routine near the elevator bank. The electrical panel was properly closed and locked, showing no signs of having been tampered with. "Did you notice anything unusual when the lights went out?" Thompson asked, shining his flashlight around the area even though the power had already been restored. "It got very dark," Jenna replied simply, wringing out her mop in the bucket beside her. "Then they came back on. I just waited until I could see again." Thompson nodded, making notes on his incident report. Did you hear any strange sounds? Electrical buzzing, sparks, anything like that? No, nothing unusual, she said, moving to clean around the elevator doors. Should I avoid this area while you're investigating? No, you're fine. Probably just a power grid fluctuation from the city. Happens sometimes when they're doing maintenance on the main lines. Thompson was already losing interest in the incident, convinced that it was a routine electrical issue that had resolved itself. He never thought to ask how the cleaning lady had managed to continue working so efficiently in complete darkness, or why she seemed completely unfazed by an emergency that would have left most people disoriented, anxious. The next morning, building maintenance supervisor Carl Stevens arrived early to check the HVAC repairs and investigate the previous night's power outage. He found the electrical panel functioning perfectly, with no signs of problems or irregularities. But when he ran his standard diagnostic tests, he discovered something that made him pause. The diagnostic software showed that a foreign device had been connected to the electrical system sometime in the past week, something that wasn't part of the building's original infrastructure. But when he physically inspected the panel, he found no evidence of any unauthorized equipment. Whatever had been there was gone, removed so cleanly that only the electronic traces remained in the system's memory. Stevens scratched his head and made a note to increase security monitoring around the building's critical infrastructure. He suspected that someone might be testing their systems for vulnerabilities, but he had no idea who or why. What he definitely didn't suspect was that the night janitor had not only discovered and removed the threat, but had done so with the kind of expertise that suggested advanced military training in explosive ordnance disposal and counter-surveillance techniques. Meanwhile, Jenna continued her routine as if nothing had happened. She arrived for her shift that evening at exactly 10 p.m., badged in with her usual quiet greeting to the security desk, collected her cleaning supplies, and began her rounds. But now she was carrying an additional burden of knowledge. Someone was actively probing Pinnacle Tech security, and she was probably the only person in the building qualified to recognize and counter such threats. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same people who dismissed her as an uneducated service worker were completely dependent on her skills to protect them from dangers they couldn't even recognize. But revealing her capabilities would mean giving up her cover, and she wasn't ready for that level of exposure yet. Have you ever had to watch people struggle with problems you could easily solve, but couldn't help because revealing your knowledge would complicate your life in ways you weren't prepared to handle? Sometimes the hardest part of having exceptional skills is knowing when not to use them. That night, as Jenna methodically cleaned each floor of Pinnacle Tech, she also conducted her own security assessment of the building. She was no longer just a janitor going through her routine. She was a trained operative protecting an asset that others didn't even realize was under threat. After the electrical incident, something shifted in how the Pinnacle Tech staff interacted with Jenna, but not in the way she might have hoped. Instead of gaining respect or even basic acknowledgement for being present during an emergency, the dismissive attitudes became more pronounced, as if her mere existence during a crisis had somehow made her a minor inconvenience that needed to be managed more carefully. Security Supervisor Bradley Morrison, a former Army sergeant who had been brought in to review the building's emergency protocols after the power outage, decided that the night cleaning crew represented a potential security liability. During his first week on the job, he implemented new restrictions that were clearly designed to limit Jenna's access to sensitive areas of the building. From now on, cleaning personnel are restricted to one floor at a time. Morrison announced during a staff meeting that Jenna wasn't invited to attend, but overheard while cleaning the adjacent conference room. They need to complete their work on each floor and receive clearance before moving to the next level. We can't have service workers wandering around the building unsupervised, especially during off hours when our security monitoring is more limited. The new protocol meant that Jenna had to check in with security guards at specific intervals, essentially treating her like a potential threat rather than a trusted employee who had been working in the building without incident for months. Morrison created a clipboard system where guards had to initial her movement between floors, turning her simple cleaning routine into a bureaucratic obstacle course. Nothing personal, Thompson explained when he handed her the new tracking sheet on her first night under the revised protocols. It's just standard security procedure. We need to know where everyone is at all times, especially people with building access after normal hours. You understand. But the way he said, it made it clear that he didn't expect her to actually understand the complexity of security operations. His tone was the same one people use when explaining simple concepts to children, patient but condescending, designed to make her feel like she should be grateful for his willingness to communicate with someone of her limited comprehension. The engineering staff embraced Morrison's new restrictions with enthusiasm, treating them as validation of their own importance and security awareness. Software architect Jennifer Walsh started making pointed comments whenever she encountered Jenna during her late-night work sessions. "I hope you don't mind, but I need to secure my workstation while you're cleaning," Walsh would say, making a show of locking her computer and covering sensitive documents. "We're working on classified government contracts here, and information security is absolutely critical. I'm sure you can appreciate that some things are just too complex and sensitive for." She would trail off diplomatically. But the implication was clear. Network engineer David Park took the restrictions even further, insisting that Jenna wait in the hallway while he personally supervised the cleaning of his office. He would stand in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching her every movement as if she might suddenly develop the ability to understand and steal advanced cybersecurity algorithms by osmosis. The defense contractors we work with have very strict requirements about who can be in proximity to sensitive technical information, Park explained to his colleague while Jenna cleaned around them. They assume that anyone without proper clearance and technical background is a potential security risk, intentional or not. It's not that we don't trust the cleaning staff personally, but they wouldn't even understand what they were looking at if they happened to see something confidential. The former military personnel in the building were particularly vocal about the need for enhanced security measures around civilian employees. Staff Sergeant Martinez began conducting impromptu security awareness briefings with the guards, often within Jenna's earshot, emphasizing the importance of maintaining operational security around people who hadn't been properly vetted for classified work. In the military, we operate under the principle of need to know, Martinez explained during one of these informal sessions. Information is compartmentalized so that people only have access to what they absolutely need to perform their specific function. Civilian employees, especially service workers, have no operational need to be aware of our activities, so we maintain strict separation between their duties and our mission-critical work. Former Navy Petty Officer Rachel Cooper nodded in agreement, adding her own perspective on the security risks posed by inadequately trained personnel. The problem is that civilians don't understand the significance of what they might overhear or observe. They don't have the training to recognize sensitive information or the discipline to maintain proper operational security. It's not their fault, they just don't have the background to understand how serious this stuff really is. These conversations always took place as if Jenna was completely incapable of understanding military terminology or operational concepts. They discussed classified security protocols, threat assessment procedures, and intelligence gathering techniques while she emptied their trash cans and cleaned their desks, never considering that she might be following every word with complete comprehension. Building maintenance supervisor Stevens joined the chorus of security-conscious employees, implementing his own set of restrictions that further limited Jenna's access to critical building systems. After discovering the mysterious electronic traces in the electrical system, he had become paranoid about unauthorized access to infrastructure controls. Cleaning staff are no longer permitted in mechanical rooms, electrical panels, or server areas without direct supervision, Stevens announced. These systems are too complex and sensitive for untrained personnel to be around. One wrong move could compromise building operations or damage expensive equipment that they wouldn't even know how to recognize, let alone avoid. The irony of Stevens' new policy wasn't lost on Jenna, the same person who had failed to detect the sabotage device that she had successfully identified and removed was now implementing restrictions to protect systems from her supposedly incompetent interference. But perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the new security culture was how it affected her ability to do her actual job. The constant supervision, check-ins, and restricted access meant that her cleaning routine now took nearly twice as long to complete. Guards had to escort her to certain areas, wait while she worked, and then escort her back to approved zones. The efficiency she had developed over months of experience was deliberately undermined by people who viewed her competence as a potential security threat. Vice President Mitchell summed up the prevailing attitude during a casual conversation with Director Harrison while Jenna cleaned the executive conference room under the watchful eye of a security guard. "I know it seems like overkill, but we can't be too careful when it comes to protecting sensitive information," Mitchell said. "These cleaning people are probably decent enough folks, but they don't have the education or training to understand what they're dealing with here. It's better to err on the side of caution and treat them like the security risk they potentially represent, even if they don't realize it themselves." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Absolutely. The last thing we need is some well-meaning janitor accidentally compromising a multi-million-dollar defense contract because they didn't understand the sensitivity of what they were handling. These people are doing important work in their own way, but they need to stay in their lane and leave the complex stuff to those of us who are actually qualified to deal with it." As they spoke, Jenna continued her work with the same methodical precision she had always maintained. Her expression neutral and professional, despite the casual dismissal of her intelligence and capabilities. She had endured similar attitudes during her military service, the assumption that quiet professionalism indicated limited understanding rather than disciplined competence. But each night, as she navigated the increasingly restrictive security protocols and endured the condescending supervision of people whose qualifications were largely theoretical, she reminded herself that maintaining her cover required accepting their underestimation. The alternative, revealing her true background and capabilities, would mean giving up the strategic advantage that came with being consistently overlooked and dismissed. Still, she couldn't help but wonder how long she could continue watching incompetent people implement security measures designed to protect them from threats they couldn't recognize, while she remained the only person in the building actually qualified to assess and counter those threats. Tonight, that question would become much more urgent. The late hours at Pinnacle Tech revealed a different side of Jenna that no one else ever witnessed. When the last security check was completed around 2 a.m. and the building settled into its deepest quiet, she would allow herself moments of authenticity that she carefully concealed during the supervised portions of her shift. In the solitude of the 14th floor break room, Jenna had developed a routine that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew her. She would sit at the small table overlooking the city lights, remove her work gloves, and reveal hands that told a story completely different from that of a simple cleaning lady. Her palms bore the faded calluses of someone who had spent years gripping repelling ropes and weapons. Her knuckles showed the subtle scars of intensive hand combat training, and her fingers moved with the precise dexterity that comes from countless Hours of weapons maintenance and technical equipment operation every night. She would carefully clean and inspect a small digital device that she kept, hidden in the false bottom of her cleaning supply cart. To anyone who might glimpse it, it looked like an ordinary fitness tracker, but it was actually a military-grade communication device capable of encrypted satellite uplinks and covert data transmission. She would check for messages, review intelligence updates, and send brief status reports using codes that would be meaningless to civilian observers, but critical to people who needed to know that certain assets remained secure and certain missions were progressing according to plan. Device never rang, never buzzed, never drew attention to itself, but it connected her to a world that existed parallel to the corporate environment of Pinnacle Tech, a world where her real name carried weight, where her skills were not only recognized but legendary, where quiet professionals like her operated in the shadows to handle threats that conventional security could never detect or neutralize. On her wrist, she wore what appeared to be a simple black sports watch, the kind that fitness enthusiasts might use to track their workouts. But this particular timepiece was a custom modification that she had created during her final months of active duty. The watch face displayed normal time and date information, but hidden within its circuitry was a sophisticated monitoring system that tracked her heart rate, stress levels, and physiological responses to potential threats. What made it truly special, though, was a feature that she had never needed to use, but always knew was there: a silent alarm system that could detect the specific electromagnetic signatures of surveillance equipment, recording devices, or tracking systems. If anyone was ever monitoring her electronically, the watch would provide subtle warnings through nearly imperceptible vibrations that would alert her to the surveillance without revealing that she was aware of it. During these quiet moments in the break room, she would sometimes remove the watch and trace her finger along its worn metal band. The weight and feel of it connected her to memories of people and places that seemed impossibly distant from her current life as a janitor. The watch had been with her during operations in places whose names she could never mention, through situations that had tested every aspect of her training and character. She would think about Lieutenant Commander Sarah "Ghost" Martinez, who had been her team leader during the most challenging missions of her career. Martinez had taught her that the most dangerous operative wasn't the one who looked impressive or intimidating, but the one who could become completely invisible while remaining absolutely lethal. "Disappear into the environment, Reyes," Martinez would say during training exercises. "Make them forget you exist, then remind them why that was a mistake." Those lessons had served her well in civilian life. But sometimes the weight of constantly hiding her true capabilities felt heavier than any equipment she had ever carried into combat. She missed the clarity of military operations, where objectives were clear, teams were trusted, and excellence was expected rather than suspected or dismissed. In the medical bay storage closet, Jenna had created a small cache of supplies that went far beyond standard first aid equipment. Hidden behind boxes of bandages and antiseptic, she kept a compact trauma kit that included surgical instruments, blood clotting agents, and pain management medications that weren't typically available outside of military or emergency medical settings. She had acquired these items gradually and carefully, never taking enough from any single source to attract attention. But the most revealing aspect of her hidden supplies wasn't their sophistication. It was how she maintained them. Every piece of equipment was cleaned, inspected, and arranged with the precision of someone who understood that, in crisis situations, seconds could mean the difference between life and death. The medications were rotated to ensure freshness. The instruments were kept sharp and sterile, and everything was positioned for immediate access by someone working under extreme stress in low light conditions. She had created detailed mental maps of the entire Pinnacle Tech facility that went far beyond what was necessary for cleaning duties. She knew the locations of all security cameras and their blind spots, The timing of guard rotations and their behavioral patterns, the building's emergency systems and their vulnerabilities. She understood the daily routines of every employee who worked late, their personal habits and security practices, their individual strengths and weaknesses in crisis situations. This knowledge wasn't gathered for any malicious purpose. It was simply how her mind worked after years of training that emphasized situational awareness and tactical preparation. She couldn't turn off the part of her brain that automatically assessed threats, identified escape routes, and developed contingency plans for every possible scenario. Even while mopping floors, she was unconsciously maintaining a complete tactical understanding of her environment. Her cleaning cart itself was a masterpiece of concealed functionality. What appeared to be ordinary supplies were actually carefully selected tools that could serve multiple purposes in emergency situations. The spray bottles contained solutions that could be quickly converted into makeshift chemical agents for crowd control or equipment neutralization. The mop handle was reinforced aluminum that could serve as an improvised weapon if necessary. Even her trash bags were heavy-duty polymer that could be used for emergency shelter, water collection, or equipment protection. But perhaps the most telling detail about Jenna's hidden life was a small photograph she kept in the zippered pocket of her cleaning uniform. It showed her in full dress uniform, receiving a commendation from Admiral Patricia Hawkins, the first woman to serve as commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. The ceremony had been closed to the press, and the commendation was for actions that would never be publicly acknowledged. In the photo, Jenna's posture was straight and confident, her eyes sharp and focused, the complete opposite of the humble, invisible persona she maintained at Pinnacle Tech. Every night, after checking her equipment and reviewing her intelligence updates, she would look at that photograph for exactly 30 seconds. It served as a reminder of who she really was beneath the gray uniform and quiet demeanor. She wasn't hiding because she was ashamed of her past or afraid of confrontation. She was maintaining operational security for reasons that went far beyond her personal preferences. The cleaning lady that everyone dismissed and underestimated was actually one of fewer than 24 women who had successfully completed the most elite military training program in the world. She had operated in environments where the slightest mistake meant death, where split-second decisions affected national security, where her skills and judgment were the only things standing between innocent people and catastrophic violence. But none of that mattered to the people at Pinnacle Tech, because they had never learned to look beyond surface appearances. They saw a janitor, so they assumed incompetence. They heard her quiet voice, so they assumed submission. They watched her clean their offices, so they assumed she was incapable of understanding their work. Tonight, all of those assumptions would be tested in ways they never could have imagined. And Jenna was about to remind everyone why underestimating a Navy SEAL, even one disguised as a cleaning lady, was always a fatal mistake. The truth about Jenna's past began 15 years earlier in the humid heat of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, where 19-year-old Jenna Marie Reyes stood among 180 other candidates for basic underwater demolition SEAL training. She was one of only 3 women in a program that had broken more seasoned warriors than anyone cared to count. The instructors looked at her slight frame and quiet demeanor and gave her 2 weeks before she would ring the bell that signaled her voluntary withdrawal from the program that she lasted through Hell Week, when 127 of her classmates had quit. She endured the psychological pressure, the physical punishment, and the relentless testing that was designed to eliminate anyone who wasn't absolutely committed to the SEAL Brotherhood. When she graduated 18 months later, she was one of only 12 candidates from her original class to earn the Trident, the Golden Eagle, anchor, and flintlock pistol that marked her as a Navy SEAL. Her father, Master Chief Petty Officer Roberto Reyes, had served 3 tours in Vietnam as a Navy hospital corpsman before transitioning to special operations training. He had never pushed her toward military service, but he had taught her from childhood that true strength came from preparation, discipline, and the willingness to act when others hesitated. "Mia," he would tell her during their weekend camping trips in the mountains above San Diego, "the world is full of people who talk about what they would do in dangerous situations. But when the moment comes, most of them freeze. The difference between survival and catastrophe is training your mind to function when your body wants to quit." Those early lessons had shaped every aspect of her military career. During her first deployment to Afghanistan, she had been assigned to a joint task force conducting counterterrorism operations in the remote tribal regions along the Pakistani border. Her team was tasked with gathering intelligence on high-value targets and conducting precision raids that required perfect coordination between multiple military units. It was during this deployment that she earned her first Navy Cross. Though the citation was classified and the operation never publicly acknowledged, her team had been inserted into a hostile village to extract a captured intelligence officer who was being held by Taliban forces. The mission had gone wrong when their helicopter support was diverted to another emergency, leaving 8 SEALs surrounded by more than 40 enemy fighters in terrain that offered no cover and no escape routes, while her teammates established a defensive perimeter. Jenna had volunteered for what everyone understood was likely a suicide mission, infiltrating the enemy compound alone to locate and extract the captured officer. She spent 6 hours moving through hostile territory, avoiding patrols, and gathering intelligence on enemy positions. When she finally located the prisoner, he was badly wounded and unable to walk. Rather than calling for extraction and risking the lives of her teammates, she had carried the wounded officer 3 miles through enemy territory to a secure landing zone, using her knowledge of combat medicine to keep him alive while evading capture. The rescue had required her to neutralize 7 enemy fighters using only her sidearm and combat knife, actions that demonstrated not just her marksmanship skills, but her ability to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. Her second deployment took her to Somalia, where she served with a specialized unit conducting maritime counter-piracy operations. The mission required SEALs who could operate equally well underwater, on ships, and in urban environments where the rules of engagement were constantly shifting. Jenna's combination of technical skills and tactical judgment made her invaluable for operations that required split-second decisions about when to use lethal force and when to exercise restraint. During one operation off the coast of Mogadishu, her team was tasked with retaking the cargo ship that had been captured by pirates holding 23 civilian hostages. The operation required simultaneous coordinated assaults from multiple entry points, with each SEAL responsible for specific sectors of the ship while ensuring the safety of innocent civilians who could be anywhere in the vessel. Jenna's assignment was to secure the engine room and communications center while neutralizing any hostiles she encountered. What she found was more complex than the intelligence briefing had suggested. The pirates had wired explosive charges throughout the ship's fuel systems, creating a situation where any gunfire could trigger a catastrophic explosion that would kill everyone aboard. Instead of engaging the hostiles with conventional weapons, she had used her training in explosive ordnance disposal to safely disarm the charges while her teammates maintained security. The process required her to work for nearly an hour in absolute darkness, using only her sense of touch to identify and neutralize devices that could have turned the ship into a floating bomb. Her actions saved not just the hostages but the entire SEAL team and prevented an environmental disaster that would have contaminated hundreds of miles of coastline. It was her final deployment that had defined both her legend and her decision to leave military service. She had been assigned to a black operations unit conducting intelligence gathering and direct action missions in Syria, where American forces were officially not present, and any operations had to be completely deniable if discovered. Her team leader was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, a veteran SEAL who had earned her reputation conducting some of the most dangerous missions of the Iraq War. Martinez recognized that Jenna's combination of technical skills, tactical judgment, and psychological resilience made her ideally suited for operations that required SEALs to operate alone for extended periods in hostile territory. The mission that ended her military career involved infiltrating a terrorist training facility to gather intelligence on planned attacks against American civilians. The operation required her to spend 3 weeks undercover in a Syrian refugee camp, posing as a displaced civilian while gathering information on terrorist recruitment and training activities. During this mission, she had discovered that the terrorist cell was planning a coordinated attack on multiple American schools, using chemical weapons that would kill hundreds of children. The intelligence was time-sensitive. The attack was scheduled to occur within days. But her extraction wasn't planned for another week. Faced with the choice between maintaining her cover and preventing mass casualties, Jenna had chosen to break operational protocol. She conducted a solo assault on the terrorist facility, eliminated 12 high-value targets, and destroyed the chemical weapons stockpile. Her actions prevented the deaths of countless innocent children, but they also compromised ongoing intelligence operations and exposed the extent of American military involvement in the region. The mission was ultimately classified as a complete success, and Jenna received her second Navy Cross, along with a personal commendation from the Secretary of the Navy. But the political fallout from the exposed operation led to difficult questions about the rules of engagement for special operations forces and the extent to which individual SEALs should be authorized to make strategic decisions in the field. Martinez had pulled her aside. After the commendation ceremony, her expression serious. "You did the right thing, Reyes. You saved lives that mattered more than any political consideration. But this kind of work takes a toll that most people don't understand. You've proven everything you need to prove. You've earned the right to choose what comes next." 6 months later, Jenna had submitted her resignation from active duty, not because she was unable to continue, but because she had seen enough of war to understand that there were other ways to serve and protect. She wanted to find a way to use her skills in situations where success was measured by lives saved rather than enemies eliminated. The transition to civilian life had been more difficult than any military operation she had ever completed. After years of clear missions and trusted teammates, the civilian world felt chaotic and unpredictable. She had tried several different jobs: security consultant, fitness instructor, emergency medical technician, but none of them provided the sense of purpose she needed. That's when she discovered that sometimes the best way to protect people was to become invisible among them, to position herself where threats could be detected and neutralized before they became emergencies. Pinnacle Tech Industries had seemed like the perfect assignment, a facility with government contracts, security vulnerabilities, and a staff that needed protection they didn't even know they required. For 8 months, she had maintained her cover while conducting her own assessment of the building's security posture and the competence of its personnel. What she had discovered was both better and worse than she had expected. The people were decent and hardworking, but they were completely unprepared for the kinds of threats that sophisticated adversaries could bring against them. Tonight, all of that preparation and patience would be tested. When real danger finally arrived at Pinnacle Tech Industries, the call came through the building's emergency communication system at exactly 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night in November. Security Supervisor Morrison's voice, crackled over the intercom with an urgency that immediately changed the atmosphere throughout Pinnacle Tech Industries. All personnel, this is a mandatory emergency drill. We have received credible intelligence about a potential security breach. All employees currently in the building must report immediately to designated safe areas for accountability and safety briefing. This is not optional. Jenna paused in her cleaning routine on the 8th floor, listening to the announcement with the trained ear of someone who understood the difference between routine drills and genuine emergencies. Morrison's voice carried stress markers that suggested this wasn't the standard monthly evacuation exercise that employees had grown accustomed to dismissing within minutes. The building's population had been consolidated into 3 main areas: the executive conference room on the 5th floor, the main cafeteria on the ground level, and the security office near the main entrance. Jenna found herself directed to the cafeteria along with the other night shift support staff, janitors, security guards, and maintenance technicians who were considered non-essential personnel during emergency situations. Morrison stood at the front of the cafeteria, flanked by Thompson and 2 additional security officers who had been called in from off-duty status. His expression was grim as he addressed the assembled group of roughly 30 people. We've received information from federal law enforcement that this facility may be targeted for infiltration by a hostile intelligence operation, Morrison began, his military bearing evident in his posture and delivery. We don't know the specific nature of the threat, but we have reason to believe that foreign operatives may attempt to breach our security tonight to access classified defense contracts. A murmur of concern rippled through the cafeteria. Software engineer Davis raised his hand nervously. Should we evacuate the building? Call the police? Morrison shook his head. Negative. Law enforcement is coordinating with building security to conduct a controlled assessment of the threat. Evacuation would potentially expose personnel to greater danger and might compromise the investigation. We're implementing lockdown protocols until federal agents arrive to sweep the facility. Former Staff Sergeant Martinez nodded approvingly from his position near the security desk. Smart approach. In military operations, you never abandon a defensive position unless you're certain the alternative is safer. This building has better security infrastructure than most civilian locations. What Morrison didn't explain, and what most of the assembled employees didn't understand, was that the federal law enforcement information had actually come from an encrypted communication intercepted by the building's own cybersecurity systems. Someone had been conducting electronic surveillance of Pinnacle Tech's computer networks, and tonight's infiltration attempt was expected to include physical penetration of the facility to install advanced monitoring equipment. The threat was real, sophisticated, and far beyond the capabilities of conventional corporate security to handle. Morrison had requested federal assistance, but the earliest response time for qualified personnel was 3 hours. Until then, they were on their own with whatever resources were available in the building. All personnel will remain in designated safe areas until further notice, Morrison continued. Security teams will conduct floor-by-floor sweeps to ensure the building is secure. No one leaves their assigned area without explicit authorization from security personnel. Jenna observed the proceedings with growing concern that had nothing to do with personal safety. She recognized the signs of a security operation that was being managed by people who understood procedures, but lacked the tactical experience to implement them effectively against sophisticated adversaries. Morrison was following textbook protocols for corporate emergency management, but those protocols were designed for conventional threats like fires, medical emergencies, or basic criminal activity. If hostile intelligence operatives were planning to infiltrate Pinnacle Tech tonight, they would be prepared for standard security responses. They would have studied the building's emergency procedures, identified vulnerabilities in the lockdown protocols, and developed countermeasures for the kind of conventional security sweep that Morrison was organizing. More importantly, consolidating all personnel into 3 predictable locations made them easier targets rather than harder ones. Professional operatives would expect civilian employees to follow standard evacuation or lockdown procedures, and they would plan their operations accordingly. The cafeteria, with its large windows and limited exit routes, was particularly vulnerable to surveillance or attack from outside the building. Thompson approached the group with a clipboard, conducting the kind of personnel accountability that Morrison had requested. "We need to verify that everyone who is scheduled to be in the building tonight is accounted for," he explained. "Please confirm your name and department when I call it." As Thompson worked through his list, Jenna noticed several concerning details that the security team seemed to be overlooking. The building's external lighting had been subtly altered, not enough to be obvious, but sufficient to create blind spots where the normal security camera coverage would be compromised. The main parking lot was unusually empty for a night when several employees were working late, suggesting that someone might have discouraged or prevented normal traffic in the area. Most significantly, she could see through the cafeteria windows that a van was parked across the street in a position that would provide excellent surveillance of the building's main entrance and emergency exits. The van had been there when she arrived for her shift, but its positioning and the fact that it had remained stationary for hours suggested professional surveillance rather than coincidental parking. Network engineer Park seemed particularly agitated as the security briefing continued. "How long is this supposed to last?" he asked Morrison. "I have critical systems that need monitoring. If there's really a cyber attack in progress, leaving the servers unattended could be worse than any physical security threat." Morrison consulted his notes. "Federal agents will arrive within 3 hours to conduct a comprehensive security assessment. Until then, all personnel remain in safe areas. No exceptions. 3 hours?" Former Navy communications specialist Roberts looked skeptical. "That's a long time to maintain defensive positions with civilian personnel. Most people aren't trained to handle extended emergency situations. You're going to have panic, medical issues, people making poor decisions because they're scared." Roberts was right, and Morrison seemed to recognize it. The security supervisor was clearly out of his depth, trying to balance federal law enforcement requirements with the practical challenges of managing frightened civilians in a potential combat situation. That's when the lights went out, not just dimmed or flickered, but cut completely, plunging the entire building into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting should have activated immediately, but nothing happened. The backup power systems that were supposed to maintain critical building functions had been disabled, leaving them in the same pitch blackness that Jenna had experienced during the earlier electrical incident. But this time, she knew it wasn't an accident. In the darkness, she could hear Morrison trying to maintain control. "Everyone remain calm. Stay in your current positions. Security teams, activate emergency lighting and restore main power." Thompson's voice came from somewhere near the security desk. "Emergency systems aren't responding. Someone's cut the main power feeds and disabled the backup generators." What Morrison and his team didn't understand was that cutting power was the first step in a professional infiltration operation. Sophisticated adversaries would disable building systems to create confusion, limit security responses, and provide cover for their entry and movement through the facility. More importantly, the personnel consolidation that Morrison had ordered was about to become a critical vulnerability. By gathering everyone in predictable locations, they had made themselves easier targets for operatives who had studied the building and planned for exactly this scenario. In the darkness, Jenna quietly moved away from the group of frightened employees, while others fumbled for phone flashlights and called out questions. She slipped toward the cafeteria's service entrance, with the silent movement that had served her well in hostile territory. It was time for the cleaning lady to disappear and for the Navy sealed to take control of the situation. Morrison's emergency drill was about to become a real-world test of everything she had learned about protecting innocent people from threats they couldn't recognize or defend against. And unlike Morrison's security team, she knew exactly what they were facing and how to handle it. The question was whether she could neutralize the threat without revealing her true identity to the people she was sworn to protect. In the absolute darkness of the cafeteria, chaos erupted within seconds. 30 frightened people began calling out to each other, their voices creating a cacophony that would mask any sounds of infiltration or movement throughout the building. Phone flashlights flickered on sporadically, creating disorienting beams of light that destroyed everyone's night vision while providing no useful illumination of their surroundings. "Everyone stay calm," Morrison shouted over the confusion, but his voice carried the strain of someone trying to maintain authority in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. "Thompson Rodriguez, activate your tactical flashlights and establish a security perimeter around the group." But Jenna was no longer part of the group. While others fumbled with their phones and called out questions, she had moved with the silent efficiency that years of combat operations had burned into her muscle memory. She reached the cafeteria's service entrance without making a sound, slipping through the door and into the darkened corridor beyond. The moment she left the cafeteria, her entire demeanor transformed. The humble posture and careful movements of a cleaning lady disappeared, replaced by the predatory alertness of a trained operator moving through hostile territory. Her breathing slowed and deepened, her steps became deliberately silent, and her awareness expanded to encompass every sight, sound, and sensation that might indicate threat or opportunity. Moving through the building in complete darkness presented no challenge for someone who had conducted operations in caves, tunnels, and jungle environments where artificial light would mean death. She navigated the familiar corridors using a combination of spatial memory, tactile reference points, and the kind of environmental awareness that allowed her to detect obstacles, changes in air circulation, and subtle variations in ambient sound that indicated the presence of other people. Her first priority was reaching her concealed equipment cache in the medical bay storage closet. The trauma kit and specialized supplies she had carefully assembled would be essential for what was coming. But more importantly, she needed to retrieve the encrypted communication device that would allow her to contact federal authorities and coordinate a proper response to the infiltration. As she moved through the 8th floor corridor, she detected the unmistakable signs of professional surveillance equipment that hadn't been present during her earlier rounds. Infrared sensors had been positioned at key intersections. Motion detectors were monitoring the elevator banks, and she could identify at least 3 locations where electronic monitoring devices had been installed to track movement throughout the building. Whoever was conducting this operation had been planning it for weeks, possibly months. They understood the building's layout, security procedures, and personnel routines with the kind of precision that suggested extensive reconnaissance and possibly inside information. This wasn't a random cyber attack or opportunistic burglary. It was a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting specific defense contracts and classified information. She reached the medical bay without triggering any of the surveillance equipment, using movement techniques that had been developed specifically for evading electronic detection systems. Once inside, she quickly retrieved her equipment and activated the encrypted communication device. The response came immediately, indicating that federal authorities had been monitoring the situation and waiting for contact from inside the building. The brief exchange of coded messages confirmed what she had suspected. A foreign intelligence team was conducting a coordinated infiltration of Pinnacle Tech, and federal response teams were still 90 minutes away from arriving on scene. More critically, The intelligence indicated that the infiltration team wasn't interested in simply stealing information and disappearing. They were planning to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence of their presence, which meant that every person currently trapped in the building was in immediate mortal danger, moving to a window that provided a view of the surrounding area. Jenna conducted a tactical assessment that confirmed her worst fears. The surveillance van across the street had been joined by 2 additional vehicles positioned to monitor all potential escape routes from the building. Professional operatives were already moving through the parking lot, approaching the building from multiple directions with the kind of coordinated precision that indicated extensive military training. She counted at least 8 individuals in full tactical gear, armed with suppressed weapons and sophisticated night vision equipment. Their movement patterns and communication discipline suggested they were either active military personnel or recently retired special operations veterans working for a foreign intelligence service. But what made the situation truly desperate was their timeline. Based on the positioning and movement of the infiltration team, they planned to enter the building within the next 10 minutes. Morrison's security team was completely unprepared for this level of threat, and the civilian employees would be helpless against professionally trained killers. Jenna had 2 choices: maintain her cover and hope that federal authorities would arrive in time to prevent a massacre, or reveal her true capabilities and engage a superior force with minimal equipment and no backup. The first option would almost certainly result in multiple civilian casualties. The second option might save lives, but it would end her covert assignment and potentially compromise ongoing federal operations. The decision was made for her when she detected movement on the 10th floor, where the executive staff had been consolidated for the emergency briefing. Someone was already inside the building, moving through the upper floors with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where to find their targets. Through her night vision assessment, she could see that the infiltrators had disabled the building's elevators and stairwell emergency lighting, creating perfect conditions for eliminating witnesses without interference from security personnel. Morrison's team was trapped in the cafeteria with no way to reach the executive staff and no means of communication with federal authorities, but they had made one critical mistake in their planning. They had accounted for conventional security responses, civilian panic, and the limitations of local law enforcement. They hadn't planned for the possibility that a Navy SEAL might be present in the building, fully equipped and tactically prepared for exactly this type of situation. Moving to her equipment cache, Jenna quickly assembled the gear she would need for what was essentially a solo assault against a superior force in a building full of innocent civilians. Her combat kit included body armor that had been concealed beneath her cleaning uniform, communications equipment for coordinating with federal authorities, and weapons that she had carefully positioned throughout the building during her months of covert preparation. More importantly, she had something the infiltrators didn't expect: complete familiarity with every aspect of the building's layout, security systems, and structural vulnerabilities. She knew which walls were load-bearing and which could be breached, where utility lines ran and how they could be manipulated, and how to move through the facility using maintenance tunnels and service corridors that wouldn't appear on any blueprint available to hostile intelligence services. As she prepared for what would essentially be a solo counter-terrorism operation, Jenna allowed herself one moment of regret for the cover identity she was about to sacrifice. The quiet cleaning lady who had found peace in simple work and invisible service was about to disappear forever, replaced by the trained killer who had earned her reputation in the world's most dangerous places. But there wasn't really a choice. 30 innocent people were depending on her to do what she had been trained to do, regardless of the personal cost. Morrison's emergency drill was about to become the most important mission of her civilian life. The infiltrators were about to discover why underestimating A Navy SEAL, even one disguised as a janitor, was always a fatal mistake. And Jenna was about to remind herself why she had earned the right to wear the trident in the first place. It was time to stop cleaning up after other people and start cleaning house. Transformation was complete within 30 seconds. Jenna stripped away the gray cleaning uniform to reveal the tactical gear she had been wearing underneath: lightweight body armor, utility belts, and equipment that had been carefully concealed beneath the loose-fitting janitor's clothes. Her auburn hair, previously held back in a simple ponytail, was now secured in a tight tactical bun that wouldn't interfere with night vision equipment or helmet use. Jenna's intervention had saved the hostages from a carefully planned elimination, but it had also triggered a more aggressive response that would test her ability to protect 30 people while engaging 7 remaining hostiles, who were now hunting her specifically. They understood that someone with advanced military training was operating in the building, and they would focus their efforts on neutralizing that threat before completing their primary mission. Moving through the building's utility corridors, she repositioned to intercept the 2-person team advancing on the cafeteria. Her route took her through maintenance tunnels that provided concealment while allowing her to monitor their approach through strategic observation points she had identified. During her months of reconnaissance, the first engagement occurred in the main corridor leading to the cafeteria. 2 infiltrators were advancing in tactical formation, using professional clearing techniques as they moved through the darkened hallway. They expected to encounter frightened civilians and overwhelmed security guards. Not a Navy SEAL who had been preparing for this exact scenario, Jenna's attack came from above, using the suspended ceiling infrastructure to position herself directly over their advance route. The engagement was violent, decisive, and over in less than 10 seconds. Both infiltrators were neutralized before they could transmit warnings or detonate the explosive devices they were carrying. But neutralizing 2 threats only intensified the pressure from the remaining 5. Their radio communications immediately shifted to emergency protocols, and she could hear them coordinating a systematic search of the building to locate and eliminate the unknown hostile who was disrupting their operation. All teams, we have a professional operator in the building. The team leader's voice crackled through the captured radio. Previous intelligence was incomplete. Assume advanced military training and equipment. Implement hunter-killer protocols and maintain communication discipline. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. 5 highly trained operatives were now actively hunting her while the hostages remained trapped in vulnerable positions throughout the building. Morrison's security team was brave but completely outclassed, and federal backup was still over an hour away. That's when Jenna made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew her history of operating alone in hostile territory. Instead of continuing to engage the infiltrators using conventional solo tactics, she activated the building's emergency communication system and began coordinating a defensive strategy that utilized every person in Pinnacle Tech as a force multiplier. Building personnel. This is your tactical coordinator. Her voice echoed through the facility with calm authority. I need immediate intelligence on hostile positions and movements. Anyone who can safely observe corridors, stairwells, or external approaches should report what they see. We're going to turn this building into a fortress that these infiltrators can't navigate without being detected. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Software engineer Davis, trapped in the executive conference room, began reporting movement he could observe through the windows. Network specialist Park, who had access to the building's digital security systems, started providing updates on elevator usage and door access logs. Even maintenance supervisor Stevens, despite his earlier dismissive attitude toward the cleaning staff, began relaying information about utility access points and structural vulnerabilities. But the most significant response came from former Staff Sergeant Martinez, who immediately understood the tactical implications of what was happening. Unknown coordinator, this is Martinez, former military. I have visual on 2 hostiles approaching the north stairwell. They're carrying explosive devices and moving with professional clearing techniques. For the first time since the crisis began, Jenna allowed herself a moment of tactical optimism. The dismissed cleaning lady was now commanding a defensive operation that included former military personnel, technical specialists, and security professionals who were finally working together against a common threat. Martinez. Acknowledged, she responded. Guide them away from civilian positions using light signals from your location. Make them think you're a larger force than you actually are. Everyone else, maintain observation and reporting. We're going to make these infiltrators fight for every inch of this building. The shift in tactical dynamics was immediately apparent. What had been a carefully planned elimination operation against confused civilians had become an urban warfare scenario where the infiltrators were being systematically tracked, reported, and maneuvered into disadvantageous positions by defenders who understood the terrain better than the attackers, moving to engage the next target. Jenna used intelligence provided by the civilian observers to position herself perfectly for an ambush in the main elevator lobby. The infiltrator she was tracking had been trying to reach the building's server room to plant explosive charges that would destroy critical digital evidence. But civilian observers had been reporting his movements in real time. The engagement occurred when he emerged from the stairwell, expecting to find an empty corridor, but instead walking into a carefully prepared killing zone. Jenna's attack was so precisely timed and positioned that the infiltrator never had an opportunity to react or call for support. But it was during this engagement that something unexpected happened, something that would change how every person in Pinnacle Tech viewed the quiet woman who had cleaned their offices for 8 months. As she moved to secure the neutralized infiltrators' equipment, building maintenance supervisor Stevens emerged from a nearby utility closet where he had been hiding during the firefight. He had witnessed the entire engagement from a distance of less than 20 feet, watching as someone he had dismissed as an uneducated cleaning lady conducted a professional military operation with skills that exceeded anything he had seen during his own Army service. Jesus Christ, Stevens whispered, staring at Jenna as she efficiently searched the infiltrator's gear. Who the hell are you? For a moment, they looked at each other across the darkened corridor. Stevens saw the tactical equipment, the professional weapons handling, and the kind of controlled violence that only came from elite military training. Jenna saw the recognition in his eyes and understood that her cover identity was finished. Someone who's been trying to keep all of you safe, she replied simply, before moving toward her next engagement. But Stevens grabbed his radio, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and disbelief. All building personnel, this is Stevens. Our unknown coordinator is Jenna from the cleaning crew. And she's not just coordinating, she's systematically eliminating hostile forces with professional military techniques that I've never seen outside of special operations units. The announcement sent shockwaves through every person in Pinnacle Tech. Morrison, Thompson, Martinez, and dozens of others suddenly understood that the quiet woman they had dismissed and underestimated was actually the most qualified person in the building to handle the crisis they were facing. But more importantly, they realized that she had been protecting them long before tonight's crisis, operating in the shadows to detect and neutralize threats that their conventional security could never have recognized. In the cafeteria, former Staff Sergeant Martinez shook his head in amazement. Navy SEAL, he said quietly to anyone within earshot. Has to be. Nobody else moves like that or handles tactical situations with that level of competence. We've been working alongside a goddamn Navy SEAL for 8 months and never knew it. The revelation transformed the entire tactical situation. Civilian employees who had been paralyzed with fear suddenly understood that they were being defended by someone whose skills and experience exceeded anything they had imagined possible. Security personnel who had been overwhelmed by the sophistication of the threat realized they were working with operational support that could actually win this fight. But for Jenna, the exposure of her identity meant that everything would change after tonight, assuming anyone survived to tell the story. The quiet cleaning lady who had found peace in invisible service was gone forever, replaced by the recognition that would follow a Navy SEAL who had conducted solo counter-terrorism operations against impossible odds. There were still 4 hostiles in the building, 30 civilians depending on her protection, and federal backup that wouldn't arrive for another 50 minutes. The hardest part of the mission was just beginning. The final phase of the operation began when the remaining 4 infiltrators made their last desperate attempt to complete their mission. With their carefully planned elimination strategy in ruins and their operational security completely compromised, they shifted to a scorched earth approach that would destroy the building and everyone in it rather than allow witnesses to survive. Through the captured RADIO equipment, Jenna intercepted their new operational plan: simultaneous detonation of explosive charges they had placed throughout the building's structural supports. The blast would collapse the entire facility, eliminating all evidence of their presence while making the incident appear to be an accidental explosion caused by a gas leak or electrical failure. But they had made one critical miscalculation. During her 8 months of reconnaissance, Jenna had identified every utility access point, structural vulnerability, and emergency system in Pinnacle Tech Industries. She knew exactly where explosive charges would need to be placed to bring down the building, and she had been monitoring those locations throughout the crisis. All building personnel. "This is Jenna," she announced over the emergency communication system, using her real name for the first time in months. "Hostiles are implementing building demolition protocols. We have approximately 15 minutes before structural charges detonate. Federal extraction is still 30 minutes out. We're going to have to save ourselves." The announcement triggered a transformation in how the Pinnacle Tech staff responded to the crisis. Instead of waiting passively for rescue, they began implementing an evacuation and defensive strategy coordinated by someone they now understood was uniquely qualified to guide them through the most dangerous situation any of them had ever faced. Morrison, despite his earlier dismissive attitude, immediately deferred to Jenna's tactical expertise. "What do you need from security teams?" he asked over the radio, his voice carrying the respect that comes from recognizing superior competence under pressure. "Secure the main stairwells and elevator shafts." Jenna responded while moving to intercept the infiltrators who were placing final charges in the building's basement. "Guide civilian personnel to the northwest emergency exits, but maintain defensive positions until I neutralize the remaining threats. Do not engage hostiles directly unless they threaten civilian evacuation routes." Former Staff Sergeant Martinez took charge of organizing the civilian evacuation with the efficiency of someone who understood tactical operations. "All personnel move in groups of 5 with security escorts. Maintain noise discipline and follow emergency lighting to designated exits. No one moves alone, and everyone follows instructions from security coordinators." But the most significant transformation was in how people viewed Jenna herself. Software engineer Davis, who had barely acknowledged her existence for 8 months, now watched in awe as she provided tactical coordination that was saving everyone's lives. "She's been here the whole time," he said to his colleague Park. 8 months of cleaning our offices. And we never realized we were working alongside someone who could do this." The basement engagement was the most challenging of the night. 4 remaining infiltrators had positioned themselves in the building's utility core, where they were placing charges designed to bring down the main structural supports. The space was confined, offered limited cover, and provided multiple advantages to defenders who were familiar with the terrain. But Jenna had been preparing for exactly this scenario. Moving through maintenance tunnels she had mapped during her covert reconnaissance, she positioned herself to engage all 4 hostiles simultaneously, using techniques that turned their defensive advantages against them. The final firefight lasted less than 3 minutes, but required every aspect of her training in close-quarters combat, explosives disposal, and tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. She neutralized all 4 infiltrators while preventing the detonation of charges that would have killed everyone in the building. But it was during this engagement that the most revealing moment of the entire crisis occurred. As she worked to disarm the final explosive device, Security Supervisor Morrison arrived in the basement with 2 of his guards, having abandoned his secure position to provide backup for the woman who had been protecting them all night. "We're not leaving you to handle this alone," Morrison said, taking a defensive position while she worked on the explosive device. "You've been covering for all of us. Now we cover for you." The gesture represented more than tactical support. It was acknowledgement from someone who had spent months dismissing her capabilities that she deserved the respect and assistance that should have been offered from the beginning. "Charges neutralized," Jenna announced as she completed the disarmament procedure with seconds to spare. "Building is secure. All hostiles are down. Federal agents should find a clean tactical situation when they arrive." But as they made their way back to the main floors, Morrison asked the question that everyone in Pinnacle Tech would be wondering about for years to come. "Why didn't you ever tell us who you really were? Why work as a cleaning lady when you have these kinds of skills?" Jenna paused before answering, considering how to explain a decision that had shaped 8 months of her life. Because sometimes the best way to protect people is to become invisible among them. You can't defend against threats you don't recognize. And you can't trust protection from someone you don't believe exists. When federal agents finally arrived 20 minutes later, they found a situation that exceeded their most optimistic projections. 8 hostile operatives had been neutralized. All civilian personnel were safe and accounted for. And critical intelligence about foreign infiltration operations had been preserved for analysis. But more importantly, they found a corporate facility where every employee had developed a completely new understanding of competence, judgment, and the difference between appearance and reality. Agent Sarah Chun, who led the federal response team, conducted her debrief with Jenna in the building's conference room while Pinnacle Tech staff watched through the windows. "Your intervention prevented what would have been a catastrophic intelligence breach and multiple civilian casualties," Chun said. "The Department of Defense will want to discuss how your skills might be utilized in future operations." Jenna shook her head quietly. "I'm not interested in returning to active operations, but I am interested in continuing to protect people who need protection, even if they don't know they need it." As the federal agents concluded their investigation and employees began returning to their normal routines, the transformation in how Pinnacle Tech operated was immediately apparent. The dismissive attitudes, condescending nicknames, and casual underestimation that had characterized the workplace culture were replaced by genuine respect and recognition of individual worth. Former Staff Sergeant Martinez approached Jenna as she prepared to leave the building for the final time as a cleaning lady. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "We all do. You've been protecting us for months, and we never even bothered to learn your last name." Director Harrison, who had spent months discussing sensitive operations in her presence as if she was furniture, offered her a position as Director of Corporate Security with a salary that reflected her actual qualifications and value to the organization. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from Building Maintenance Supervisor Stevens, who had witnessed her tactical skills firsthand during the crisis. "I spent 30 years in the Army," he told her. "I thought I knew what competence looked like. You've been showing us what excellence looks like. And we were too blind to see it." 3 weeks later, Jenna accepted a position with a private security consulting firm that specialized in protecting corporate facilities from sophisticated threats. Her new job involved the same kind of detailed facility assessment and threat detection that she had been conducting at Pinnacle Tech. But now her recommendations carried the authority and respect that her expertise deserved. On her final day at Pinnacle Tech, she received a letter from Admiral Patricia Hawkins, her former commanding officer, who had learned about the incident through federal intelligence channels. "Reyes," the letter read, "your actions at Pinnacle Tech demonstrate that the transition from military to civilian service doesn't require abandoning the mission. It requires finding new ways to serve and protect. You've proven that the most effective guardians are often those who remain invisible until the moment their skills are desperately needed." But for Jenna, the most important lesson from her 8 months as an underestimated cleaning lady wasn't about tactical operations or threat assessment. It was about the value of recognizing potential in people who don't fit conventional expectations, and the importance of treating everyone with the respect they might deserve, even if their true capabilities aren't immediately apparent. Have you ever realized that someone you overlooked or underestimated was actually extraordinary? Take a moment to appreciate the people around you whose true worth might not be immediately obvious. Sometimes the most remarkable individuals are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when their skills and character can make a difference in ways you never imagined possible. The cleaning lady was gone, but the lesson she taught would influence how Pinnacle Tech employees viewed competence, respect, and human potential for years to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.